Good afternoon. I am Jim Schurter, Professor of Art and Design, and on behalf of the Mott Community College Fine Arts Gallery and the Art and Design Department, I would like to welcome you all to Art Talk, a series of conversations that features artists and educators sharing their insights into their creative processes and research. These talks have been made possible in part by the Ballinger Trust, and today marks the last of our talks for the 2020-2021 academic year. If you have any questions during today's talk, please feel free to post them in our online chat through the live stream during the talk at any time, and I will make every effort to make sure they get addressed. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome Douglas Sjoquist, who will be talking to us about the golden age of album cover art, which will demonstrate that the artwork on record album covers between 1967 through 1983 reflected a diminished use of photography and a celebration of art that also introduced a young audience to world culture themes and art history. Doug is currently a retired professor from Lansing Community College and a visiting faculty in the Department of Religious Studies at Michigan State University. He holds a Bachelor of Science from Northern Michigan University in Marquette and a Master of Arts from the University of Hawaii in Honolulu. Welcome, Doug, and thank you for joining us today for Art Talk.
Thank you so much for the invite to do this. It's a topic that I'm pretty passionate about. Focus, as Jim said, the focus on this presentation is going to be on album cover artwork from 1967 to 1983. And I want to demonstrate why I consider that time frame in the whole history of album covers, why that time frame is a golden age, so to speak. So we're going to talk about the diminished use of photography and the celebration of artwork and how that works into it, and talk about world cultural themes and some art history today. So let's get started, and I'm going to use this PowerPoint and we'll see how this all goes. Hang on now. All right. So the first thing I wanted to show you is I'm going to do a comparative analysis right off the bat and show you some album covers from 1965. I'll take 5 album covers from 1965, and then I will use 1967, the very beginning of this golden age, to do a comparison and see what you guys think, okay? So, golden age, you guys know that the golden age is a metaphor that's used primarily by historians for a time when that civilization experiences an extraordinary period of cultural creativity in literature, the arts, poetry, science, technology. So the golden age for the album cover design, that kind of medium, 1967 and 1983. So the big question is, what was it that made the interior of those years, those parameters, a golden age? So let's take a look. The first slide I have up here is 2 albums comparing 1965 with 1967. So you look at the Sonny and Cher album cover from 67 or 65 with this Andy Warhol image of a banana on an album cover. This is Velvet Underground and Nico. I think that it can be pretty easily argued that Andy Warhol's image of a banana on the cover of this March 1967 album was the first to signal that things are really changing and going into an alternative direction. In the same year, in June of 1967, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band came out. And as you can see here, when this came out, it's pretty clear by this time, by the middle of the year, 1967, there's no turning back. Big difference between 1965 and 1967. Then one of my favorite albums came out in November of 1967. This is Disraeli Gears by Cream. The artist here is Martin Sharp, who's from Australia. If you guys are familiar with this album, Martin Sharp not only did the artwork on the album cover, with all these day glow reds and pinks and yellows. He also did the lyrics for Tales of Brave Ulysses on the same album. But it's a big contrast, isn't it, between Beach Boys today and the artwork that we have on the 1967 album cover. Another album that 67, I think, is this one that came out in December. This is Hendrix's second record album, Axe as Bold as Love. It's obviously got a Hindu theme. I'm going to talk about this album cover in a little bit. But compare that with the Dave Clark 5 1965 album cover, where they have the band members superimposed on a map of the continental United States. By the way, what's wrong with that map? Anybody want to jump in and tell me what's wrong with that map of the United States?
I'm curious where the upper part of Michigan is.
That's right. There's no UP in there. Not a UP in there. That's a trend that's been happening since 65 and even before. You still get it today. There was just in the Super Bowl. You remember the Super Bowl commercial and the problem with not having a UP in the map in one of the commercials for, I think it was Jeep. Still goes on. Doesn't make the Upers very happy. Compare this 1965 album cover of the Rolling Stones with the 1967 album cover by the Rolling Stones. The 67 album cover, His Majesty's Satanic Request, it's got a lenticular album cover on it. It's kind of nice, the 3D effect that you have on it. You guys have seen it. It's got an interesting cover. So now you can kind of tell right off the bat that 1965 album covers are all about photography, right? Portrait photography, conventional lettering styles. This album cover, you don't need, on the Stones, you don't even see any lettering on there, right on the cover. So let's see what's happening after 1983. So I think, the artists are really declaring their independence for sure from the ordinary, and I think they began shaping this so-called golden age in the life cycle of record album art. I think this is all happening in 1967. So if you think about the best-selling albums of the 1980s, you think about Madonna, you think about Michael Jackson, you think about Lionel Richie, Wilson, their Tears for Fears, other bands. I'm going to compare that. I'll take the year 1969, which is right smack dab in that golden age. So look at the difference between this and 1984. This is a 1969 album by Grateful Dead. The artist is Rick Griffin, who's done a lot of posters for the San Francisco scene and most of the Grateful Dead albums. So I compare that with Madonna's Like a Virgin album. This 1969 album is Jethro Tull's second album. The artist here is Jimmy Grashaw. He's a New York-based artist. This is a woodcut. He made an album cover out of woodcut. And it's an interesting album cover because if you open it up, the album title is Stand Up. So there's a thing inside that makes the members of the band, they stand up, like, I don't know what you call it, a fold. But compare that with 1985 album cover, Tears for Fears. Or 1986, Lionel Richie. Compare that with 1969 Buffalo Springfield Greatest Hits album, Retrospect. The artist, this is a collage, and the artist is Eve Babbitts. She's done quite a few album covers. Michael Jackson, Bad album in 87 came out. Compare that with 1969 Golden Age. This is Santana's first album cover. And the artist here is Lee Conklin. I've always liked this album cover. It's a pen and ink artwork. Lee Conklin's from Michigan. He went to Calvin College. I believe he was in the Korean War. But he moved to California. He just dropped out of Calvin College. Him and his wife moved to California. I went there and started doing posters. If you think about 1988, here's Prince. Compare that to 1969 Jeff Beck album, the second Jeff Beck album, I think, or it's called Beckola. And on the cover of this Beckola album is an image that was done, a painting that was done by Rene Magritte called La Chambre d'Écoute, the listening chamber. So we got a piece of art history that now is on the album cover. So you can see, I think, pretty clearly how the post-1983 covers are similar to the 1967 covers, right? I think the evidence is pretty indisputable. You look at pre-67, you look at post-1983, photography rather than artwork took precedent on these album covers. So the distinguishing characteristics, I think, of the golden age are the following things. There's certainly a diminished use of portrait photography, and there's an emphasis on artwork. What these art directors did for these record companies is that they hired artists who worked in these traditional art forms or art mediums like oil on canvas, woodcut even, watercolors, newer art mediums like collage, airbrushing. They really created an unparalleled age or era of album cover design. There's also a variety of art mediums that are used, as I said, but the creativity in the album cover design is pretty amazing. I'll talk about that in a second. But you got, lenticular album covers, you got vertical folds, you got horizontal folds. And then as far as themes of the artwork on album covers during this time frame, a lot of world cultural themes, a lot of styles and themes from art history, all on the album cover artwork. It was great. It really inspired a lot of kids. So let's just take very quickly, just take a look at some of the art mediums. This is a watercolor. This is I don't think you'd ever see an image like this on pre-1967 album, would you? This is an album cover that's King Crimson's first album, In the Court of the Crimson King, it is called. The artist here is Barry Godber. He really had a short career. I think he passed away when he was only 24 years old. He's a computer programmer, and he got involved with King Crimson with Robert Fripp, and did this album cover. But it kind of reminds me of, if you're familiar with The Scream by Edward Munch, Norwegian, came out in 1893, somewhere around there. It's pretty dramatic, but it's watercolor. You have another art medium is oil and tempera. I'm going to talk a little bit about these two album covers later on. A yarn painting, believe it or not, on Santana's 1982 album. This is a Mexican artist from the Huichol culture in north central Mexico. That culture is noted for yarn paintings. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Woodcuts, we mentioned, pen and ink, another art medium used in this time frame. Lenticular technology. You guys know what I mean by that 3D effect that you get with the plastic. They put that on the cover. Johnny Cash, this album came out in 1969.
So if you moved these albums, right, they would actually animate slightly.
Yeah, that's right. They move. Yeah, that's right. Thanks for that. That's good. They move. The heads turn and stuff like that. Lithographs are used, another medium. Bad Fingers, I think 1982 album was Peter Max, lithograph colored. And then you see on the right-hand side of the screen, you see a lithograph that was actually done by M.C. Escher. And then what the record company did, the Atlanta record company, they colored it in and made a colored lithograph out of it, but used it for the cover of 1969 or 70 album cover for Mata Hoople. Airbrushing, As I said, Rick Griffin on the left-hand side, Grateful Dead album. You're not going to find any lettering styles like that. I mean, Rick Griffin was really noted for his lettering styles. It's very hard to read, but it says Grateful Dead up there, apparently. And the right-hand side is a collage that was done by Anton Kelly, another San Francisco poster artist. So the art mediums are varied. You look at the album covers, there's a lot of creativity that's happening during this time frame. And one of the things that I want to share with you is that the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band that came out in June of '67, I think is the first album cover to have lyrics printed on the cover. And Hendrix's Axis Bold as Love also has lyrics printed on the cover. And you can see from the examples that I showed you that there's a variety of lettering styles. Rick Griffin's stuff is unbelievable. You have horizontal folds or vertical folds to the albums. Hendrix's album is the first album, really, that Axis Bold as Love album is the first one to have a horizontal or a vertical fold to it. Horizontal ones have come out, as I said, 3D, the lenticular stuff, interactive art. Some album covers had interactive art, like the first one I showed you of Andy Warhol's image of a banana. You could peel it. You can peel it back. It reveals a pink banana. It has all sorts of implications, I guess. So let's take a look at some of the dominant themes. If there aren't any questions, let's take a look at some of the dominant themes in the album art.
Great.
I think that it's should say this, that one of the most compelling aspects of the album cover art from this colorful age was the international nature of its content. In the early '60s, I want to say something about Marshall McLuhan. This Canadian professor and philosopher, he wrote a book called The Gutenberg Galaxy, came out in '62. But it's an interesting thing because he's the guy that introduced us to the term global village. And he predicted that the world would become more and more interdependent because of all these advances in communications technology. I gotta tell you, I think artists took him up on this. Artists associated with this album cover golden age introduced us to the global neighborhood, so to speak, through their artwork on the album covers. And it's pretty obvious to me, anyway, that these artists that were doing this artwork thought of themselves as global citizens, world citizens. And to these artists, the world was a global village, and they offered their artwork as evidence of it. I'll give you a good example. Matty Clarvine, who's one of the, has a lot of his artwork on album covers. He said that I live everywhere I go. I'm a post-agricultural nomad. The world is my apartment, and its many cultures my furniture, he said. And boy, if you look at his artwork, he's an amazing artist. And some of his artwork that he's done, which I'll talk about a little bit today later on, was put on album covers. The artists, the musicians, and the bands really thought that was great stuff. But I'll talk about him a little bit. But I'm going to give you a little insight into this. If you look at this slide by Matty Clarvine, this painting on the left-hand side of the screen was done in 1965. But the artwork was used on a 1970 album by the Chambers Brothers called New Generation. This is a really, really complex piece of artwork. It's circular, as you can see, and it took them about 3 years to complete this artwork. It's 2.5 feet in diameter when we do the exhibit at Mott Community College coming up in September, I'll have a large poster of it, a life-size poster of it, and you can look at the detail. But boy, the international content of this artwork is pretty obvious. You can see images of Hindu temples, Hindu deities. There's Salvador Dali's in there. Socrates is in there. Yeah, a lot of stuff. If you look carefully at this imagery that's put on the Chambers Brothers album, if you look at about 6 o'clock, if this was a clock, if you look at where the 6 would be on a clock, you'll see that it's different from what it was on the original artwork. You guys see that? That's one of the members of the band in the Chambers Brothers. Also, and you don't see that, of course, in the original artwork, right? If you look at about 3, where the number 3 would be on a clock, there's also a member of the Chambers Brothers that was painted in there. So this is, Mighty Clarvine had to do a couple of adjustments here in the artwork. I'm not sure what the process was. They didn't have Photoshop at this time, that's for sure. So they just had to paint it in or paste it in. But this is by far the most complex piece of album cover artwork that you'll find in the Golden Age. One of the principal forces, I think, affecting the development of music, we're just looking at the music from this period, was Hinduism. Hinduism had a lot of influence on the musicians of this period, but also on the artwork. A lot of rock musicians and groups like Santana, Supertramp, Steely Dan, numerous other ones, they were all attracted to these contemporary yogis and swamis from India, like Meher Baba, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is in there. And 2 albums from, just to give you an example, 2 albums from the 1960s and 70s were inspired by the writings of Paramahansa Yogananda, who was the founder of Self-Realization Fellowship Organization. One of those albums was Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes. Another one was Young Rascals' album called Sea that came out in 1969. If you're familiar with Supertramp, Even in the Quietest Moments album, there's a song on that album called Babaji, which is about a Hindu saint that is mentioned by Yogananda. Another album cover that comes to mind is Santana's Caravanserai album. There's a poem inside the album cover of that Caravanserai by Yogananda from his book called Metaphysical Meditations. It's not only the teachings of Hinduism, but the art of Hinduism too is going to play a role in this. The reason why I have the Sgt. Pepper's up here is because this is the first album cover that has Hindu images in it. So among the 60 or so people that are included in the artwork here, this collage, are 4 Self-Realization Fellowship gurus. And you look very carefully, I'm going to show you this in a second, but if you look very carefully in the upper left-hand corner, there's a man up there. This is Sri Yukteswar. He's a Hindu yogi. Make it a little bit easier for you to find him. You see where Yukteswar is up in the upper left-hand corner. And then in the very middle of the artwork, you can see the head of Babaji, which is probably right next to maybe W.C. Fields or something. I don't know, I'm not sure who that image is, but can you see it? And then you can see the top of the head to the right. This is Lahiri Mahasaya, another Hindu saint is there. And of course, the founder of Self-Realization Fellowship is on the upper right-hand corner, Yogananda, next to Bob Dylan. You can see his image right below Bob Dylan's chin. This is a significant step, have Hindu images. You'll never find this kind of stuff before 1967. So this is a kind of a prominent thing that comes out in the Golden Age. I was going to say this, Hindus, they hold that human beings progress through life stages of birth, youth, adulthood, old age, death. It's a cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that is called samsara in Hinduism. And every human being, Hindus believe that every human being is a part of this cycle of birth, death, and rebirth until they become realized and realize that their own identity is one with Brahman. And I think the artist here, Joe Garnett, is a Texas-based artist. He's still living, by the way. Captures this Hindu theme of reincarnation, what they call samsara. This is a Doors album that came out in '72. Jim Morrison was dead by that time. But the Doors had, I think, to fulfill their contract obligations with Elektra Records, they had 2 more records to do. They said, oh, we'll just do it by ourselves then. So this is an album that was done by the 3 remaining members of the Doors. So it's kind of a cool album though.
Is this the front and the back cover of that album?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a horizontal fold to it. Yep. And you can see what I did. I cut it so you can't see the imagery that you would see right on the end piece, the sleeve of it. And I'll tell you a little bit about this album cover too. This we showed this before, but this is the first album cover to have a vertical fold. The other one that we just showed you was a horizontal fold. This is a vertical one. No albums before this had this. It also had lyrics printed on it. This is a great album cover. Hinduism teaches that there's only one God. I think there's a big misconception of Hinduism in the United States, and people think it's polytheistic. It's not polytheistic. There is only one God, but this one God is approached with many different forms. There's a multiplicity of forms that this God takes. And for linguistic purposes, I guess, these forms are sometimes referred to as deities, like Vishnu, Brahma, Shiva. But Hindus believe that you can gain release from that journeying, that seemingly endless journey, and that we talked about earlier with that samsara, the birth, death, rebirth cycle, by devoting yourself to one or more of these deities. And a lot of these deities are showing up on the album cover artwork here. You see images of Vishnu, you see Ganesh, you see Krishna, you see Hanuman, a lot of imagery that is from the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana. And you see Hendrix, the 3 members of the Jimi Hendrix group are kind of depicted the way Hindus would depict Brahma with 3 heads. It's kind of an interesting album cover. I love it. And there, of course, on the foreground, you have Hindu women in saris, nicely dressed. This is there's a couple interesting stories about this album cover, by the way. I'll share with you. One of them is that, David King and Roger Law, they went to Hendrix. They said, well, what do you want on the cover for your second album? And Hendrix replied, he said, well, give me something Indian, he said. So they brought him back this great album cover, and Hendrix was disappointed in it. He didn't like it because he wanted something Indian. He thought, they were talking about Native American stuff, because Hendrix is part Cherokee. So there's a little bit of miscommunication there. But the album cover is great, whether Hendrix liked it or not. Another thing that's interesting about this album cover is banned in 2014 in the country of Malaysia. It's very strange stuff there. Malaysia has a pretty diverse religious population there, but maybe about 6% of Malaysian population is Hindu. But the government of Malaysia didn't want them to be upset about this kind of imagery, and they thought it'd be offensive, so they just banned the album cover imagery in Malaysia. So they collected all the CDs and all that, and they replaced it with a Hendrix group in concert on the cover. Another thing that we should talk about a little bit is Buddhism. From early on in Asian history, Buddhists always thought that making an image of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva would bring spiritual merit. And Robert Vernosa did the artwork on here. He's from Boulder, Colorado. In this artwork, you see Buddha images all lined up in a row, going back into a vanishing point. There's a lot of Buddhist imagery in the artwork of this golden age, lots of it. And it reminded me of Buddhist temples in Thailand. We were in Thailand. This is the way they line up all the historical Buddhas. You see this very often. I think similar. So it's not only Hinduism and Buddhism, but there's an awful lot of Asian themes in the artwork as well during this golden age, and a lot of it is Chinese stuff. And one of the favorite themes, I think, is dragons. Roger Dean did this artwork on the Asia album that came out in 1982. Shusei Nagaoka, a Japanese artist. This album came out in what, 78, maybe 76. But this is great album covers. In Chinese mythology, you see dragons all the time, and you see them carrying this sphere, this white sphere. It's a pearl. And in Chinese mythology, dragons and pearls represent yin and yang. That's the way the artists depict yin and yang symbols. The yin symbol is the pearl, and the yang symbol is a dragon. Dragons were a favorite, I think, motif for album cover artists during this golden age. Here's a Thin Lizzy album called Chinatown, 1980. The other one is a Cold Fire album. I didn't know too much about the artist who did this, Floyd Uehara. Jim Fitzpatrick, who did the Thin Lizzy album, he does a lot of stuff with Irish and Celtic artwork. He kind of suspended that a little bit and did some Chinese artwork, but great stuff. Japanese ukiyo-e. Ukiyo-e is a Japanese word, just means artwork or pictures of a floating world. Maybe you've heard of that before. But this was another favorite theme, I think, of some of the artists of this golden age. You know that a lot of 19th century European artists were influenced by this ukiyo-e tradition in Japan. People like Manet, Monet, Van Gogh, of course. But I think what's left out of the discussion is the influence that this ukiyo-e tradition had on album cover artists. And this album cover art on the right-hand side by Richard Evans depicts two geisha with a customer. It's a parody, obviously, because what they're doing is exchanging Emerson, Lake and Palmer album covers and playing them on a record player. But if you look at the artwork, you got like Hokusai's Mount Fuji in the background. It reminds me a lot of Utagawa Toraharu's artwork or Hokusai's artwork. Some more Japanese ukiyo-e tradition, Floating World. Jade Warrior is a British band, progressive rock band, I guess. But in this imagery, you'll see that there's a samurai warrior who's superimposed upon a rather modern-looking imagery, maybe to represent the idea of a floating world. But it's interesting because the artwork highlights a samurai reading this open book, and it's a reference to the band's name. In Japanese culture, literature, poetry, art formed a big part of a samurai's training and a warrior's training. So in Japan, a samurai was expected to be an intellectual as well as a skilled fighter. I think this typically represents that kind of imagery. How many people can recognize this? This is Maddie Clarvine's work, 1962. It's called The Annunciation. Think about in art history how many album covers or how many pieces of artwork are called The Annunciation. But here, this is the Annunciation, biblical references to the Annunciation, but given an African theme. So this is a Black Virgin Mary being visited by a red angel, Gabriel, who's astride a conga drum. And Maddie Clarvine said the reason I'm doing it this way is because this is how, in African cultures, maybe the Annunciation would be communicated with by congas. You can see Maddie Clarvine in the left-hand side, he painted himself in the imagery. This 1962 artwork appeared on Santana's 1970 Abraxas album. The lettering, what they had to do is add the lettering style. The lettering was done by Bob Venosa, the guy who did that Buddhist artwork with the vanishing Buddhists. But here's a question for you guys. I'm going to do this in a second. Maddie Clarvine also did this artwork for Miles Davis called Bitches Brew. So if you look carefully at this album cover and the previous one, what do you see that is common to them both? I think I have a question about that. What similarity do you see in the artwork? What do you think? This is what it is. You saw the Wodabe nomads. These are nomadic culture from the country of Niger in Africa. Maddie Clarvine lived with these people for a while. And so there's a lot of African themes that you're going to find in artwork during this golden age. But if you look at the artwork here, you see the three figures in the background on the left-hand side. Those are all Wodabe nomads, just like the image on the left here.
So it's just similar to that quote you gave us earlier, here's an artist who has lived and experienced what he's bringing to his art. So it's not just appropriation, right, of an artistic style. He's actually referencing his own personal experience. This is amazing.
Yeah. People didn't really, anthropologists never got interested in these Wodabe nomads until maybe about the 1980s, early 80s. So this is a great book if you get a hold of it. They're also on the cover of a 1983, maybe 82 National Geographic magazine. I hate to keep doing Maddie Clarvine, but he's probably produced over 60 album covers. This one was done specifically for this album cover, like Bitches Brew. He was friends with Miles Davis, and Miles Davis asked him to do the album cover design for this album called Live Evil. Came out in '71. So Miles Davis said, give me something that represents live or life, and he did. So on the right-hand side is the cover of this album. And Maddie Clarvine's friend had lived in Kenya, and these are young Turkana women that are from the western part of Kenya, called Lake Turkana area. And so this is again African influence. And there's a great story about the back. Miles Davis asked Maddie Clark, he said, well, I want you to do the back cover too. And Miles Davis said, give me something that kind of represents evil, like a big fat toad or something like that. And Maddie Clark in his art studio had a Newsweek magazine that was laying on the floor of J. Edgar Hoover, and he used that as a source of inspiration to create this image in the back of the album cover. Looks like Jabba the Hutt, you know, with a large yellow wig and stuff on it. Interesting though.
So how was this album received and its artwork received? Because even the images on the front, though I don't see anything wrong with any of it, but
Yeah,
you still have nudity
a lot of
being portrayed. You have this image on the back. So how was that being received at this time?
yeah, it's a great question, Jim, because you know these two album covers created no controversy whatsoever compared to other images, like uh, the UK version of Jimi Hendrix's Electric Ladyland that had all the nude women that were on it. You know, those things got censored out. There's a lot of things get censored during this time frame, which is another topic that I like to explore. But these two album covers presented no problem with people. Um, I think because they knew that Maddie Clarvin was already an established artist, um, you know, in the art world, so they just never considered it controversial. I'll show you some that were later on. Another African theme is Egyptian culture. This Earth, Wind, and Fire album cover was done by Shusei Nagaoka, 77. And then the front cover on the right-hand side is the Temple of Ramses II. Pyramids, you know, you see a lot of images of pyramids, so there's lots of this kind of stuff in album cover artwork in the Golden Age. Roger Dean did this artwork for Asia. You've got Wishbone Ash, came out in 73, live dates. Another African theme, Egyptian theme specifically. So Asian themes, African themes, Latin American themes, you know, Central American ones. If you look at this great album cover by Roger Dean, Tales of Topographic Oceans, sitting in the very back of it, this is a horizontal fold, by the way, but in the very background is a central tower or central pyramid at Chichen Itza, Mexico. So influence of that. Another album cover that has that same imagery in it is this one by Vandenberg. It's a little bit outside the Golden Age, but still the influence is still there. So this is a platform of the Jaguars, and they got was right near Chichen Itza's pyramid. By the way, Vandenberg was the guitar player in the band. Adrian Vandenberg is the lead guitar player in the band. He did the artwork. He later joined Whitesnake. This is a album I showed you before, Shango. I don't know much about the artist, Cristobal Gonzalez, but it's a 1982 album by Santana. And it's a yarn painting that they took a photograph of and used it for the imagery on the background or on the album cover. The culture that we're talking about here is Huichol. It's spelled Huichol. They're an indigenous culture of Mexico. Another good example of a theme that has to do with North American cultures or Central American cultures here is this album cover by Tom Cervenek, poster artist in San Francisco. The band here is a band called Malo, and Carlos Santana's brother, Orge, is in this band. And it's a pretty good band, but they were pretty popular in the early 70s. But look at the artwork here. It's all Native American, indigenous people. It's great, great stuff. Let me show you a couple other examples. The painting on the left is by a famous artist in the West, in the United States called Frank McCarthy. The painting is called The Last Crossing, and it was used on the Marshall Tucker album Long Hard Ride. Obviously a Western theme. You get a lot of this kind of stuff. The Eagles on the Border album was done by BT and Yaz. I got to tell you about this artist, is Navajo. He was born here in Arizona, in Navajo Nation. And he's got a pretty long art career. He's a self-trained artist. He started his art career probably when he was 12 years old, he said, when he sold his first painting for 25 cents. But his long career was interrupted during World War II. He was one of the Navajo code talkers during World War II. And he passed away in 2012. But he's got, this Southwestern theme here of an eagle or some bird with a snake in its mouth, flying over the desert. It's great stuff. So I had a question for people, and they can open it for discussion for a little bit. We got a couple more minutes. Artists associated with the Golden Age simulated a curiosity about cultural diversity among a young audience who had no previous exposure to or interest in world cultures. I'm just wondering if you guys agree with that or not.
Oh, well, I definitely see diversity across the board in a lot of this, and I mean, you can see how this could be, what a vehicle it was to raise awareness for the youth of this time period, right? I mean,
Yeah.
to expose them to other things. I have a question for you on this. I don't want to get away from your question, but
No, it's
I'm
good.
wondering how much of this artwork, because even talking about like the Hendrix album art, where it was Indian in a Hindu sense as opposed to Native American, right? So how much of this artwork was really related to the albums, or was it just the artwork for the artwork's sake?
Yeah, not much. Honestly, it's art for art's sake on a lot of this stuff. It's just that sometimes the musicians were given a say-so in what kind of artwork they wanted on the covers. But you think about Yes album, Tales from Topographic Oceans. I mean, what does that artwork have to do with the album cover or with the music inside of it? I don't know. So I think a lot of times it's just to the artist's discretion, the musician's discretion to put a certain artwork on the cover.
So do you think
Sometimes
it
it
was,
does, sometimes not.
sorry
Yeah,
about that, Doug, I didn't mean to cut you off, I apologize.
no,
So I'm just wondering, do you think that because of these musicians' own ability to see the bigger world, because of their positions they were in and their career choices, that their own kind of awakening to new cultures was then that's what was really driving this and kind of this exposure for the youth that were buying their albums?
absolutely. These guys are really being exposed now. They're very enlightened artists, I think, in a lot of ways. But they want to share that enlightenment, so to speak, to a wider audience, a young audience. The kids that are buying these album covers, they've never seen Woda Abe Nomads before, for example, or they're not really familiar with some of the Native American stuff. And I think this is a way that these artists and pretty enlightened art directors were trying to educate a population, a young audience who is very open to other cultures. So I think it's kind of for me personally, I got to tell you, album cover artwork got me interested in world cultures, which I used to teach at Lansing Community College. And I use these album covers a lot of times in the classroom as a hook, as a teaching hook to get kids talking about world cultures. So it had an impact on me. I have to assume it had an impact on probably some other people.
Oh, absolutely. I can't see how it wouldn't. And especially when you're thinking of this time period that we're talking about right now. I
Yeah,
mean, it has an influence today when you're looking at it, but then it had to be just eye-opening.
eye-opening. Oh boy, that's for sure. Listen, let's take a look at one more topic, and then we'll open it up a little bit and see what you guys think of the art history stuff. So another dominant theme that I see in the album cover artwork during this golden age is a lot of art history. It's going to find its way into this album cover thing. There's I think this is one of the most fascinating parts of album cover artwork during this golden age is the art history part of it. You're going to find that a lot of images from art history are on here. This is something that started in the golden age time frame, but continued all the way into the 21st century. I'll give you some examples. So I've always told the students that this is a development that really started during the golden age, but it was the inclusion of these paintings by great masters in art history. But the trend started there, but it continued on into the 21st century. Let me give you some examples. You guys probably have heard of the band Coldplay, right? My students, now I'm getting into where the students are. I said, look at this, is a painting that was done by Delacroix back in the 1830s. But on the 2008, all as far as the 21st century, we're still on album covers putting art from art history on it. This Viva La Vida album is an interesting thing because it's got a French theme to it. It's an English band, right? Coldplay. And it's got a French artistic theme on the cover, but Spanish writing, Viva La Vida. And also, if you know Fleet Foxes, another 2008 album, this is a Bruegel painting, Netherlandish proverbs. Sometimes this painting in art historians, they call it the Blue Cloak. But it's a 1559 painting by Bruegel that's on an album cover. And you know what? This continues on, you guys. In 2019, I don't know if you've ever heard of Andrew Bird, but this is a pastiche, obviously, of Jacques-Louis David's Death of Marat. The album came out in 2019, my finest work yet, it says. So anyway, during the golden age, the so-called fine arts intersected with popular culture through the medium of album covers, and there is a large and diverse body of album covers to illustrate. So let's take a look at it. Let's start with the Greeks. This is kind of an interesting topic. I really like doing this stuff. This is a vase or a vase, if you will, that goes back to the 6th century BCE. This is in one of the museums in New York. But Santana put this on his album cover in 1979 because he thought that running a marathon race was an analogous to a spiritual journey. And Santana at this time was a devotee of Sri Chinmoy, a Hindu yogi. And inside the album cover, there's a message by Sri Chinmoy that relates running a marathon to an inner journey. And so it's on the cover, but this is obviously a Greek theme. You guys are probably familiar with Hieronymus Bosch, this painting that came out in the late 15th century, the Garden of Earthly Delights. You guys have seen this before. I want you to look carefully at the right-hand panel. I saw this painting in the Prado in Madrid. It's huge. It's a large triptych, 3 pieces to it. But look at the right-hand side. The right-hand side is called Hell, this part of it. And it was used, by the way, on a 1969 Deep Purple album, self-titled album. And what Deep Purple did, this is another interesting feature of this, is they inserted the pictures of the band. It looks right dead center A little bit to the left, you see the musical instrument there on the left-hand side? Looks like a lute or some stringed instrument. Well, to the right of that are the members of Deep Purple that are inserted into the painting. Again, this is a time frame when we don't have Photoshop. We don't have any of that kind of stuff. They probably did it by just a collage style inserted in there. And by the way, this album by Deep Purple is a big mistake. They thought it was going to come out in color and it didn't. And so they're a little upset about that. Came out in black and white. The Renaissance, another Renaissance work. You got, Arcimboldo here on this Kansas album, 1975. This is a series that was actually done by Arcimboldo that depicted the four elements: water, air, and some other things. This is the water part of that series. It was done in 1573. So anyway, it's on an album cover by Kansas. Everybody's familiar with Botticelli. This is a slightly modified version of Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Appears on Judy Pulver's album Pulver Rising. It's just another example of a work by a famous artist, famous painter, finding its way to a record album during this golden age. There's some modification here, of course. There's a towel placed over Botticelli, Venus, so they could sell the record and not worry about anything. But not here. Paul Gauguin, another one. Two Tahitian Women, 1899. Columbia Records produced this, I believe. But Objects of Desire is an album by Michael Franks. Came out in 82. It's got a Gauguin painting on it. Many people that know Gauguin are familiar with Tahitian landscape. This piece of artwork came out in 1891. Well, guess what? It shows up on the Rascals' Peaceful World in 1971. So again, here's these are good examples that illustrate to students and to a lot of people that art history had a big influence on the album cover artwork. And maybe you've heard of Henri Rousseau before. He's associated with a movement in Europe called Primitivism. But this band, Osibi Rock, is a British band. It's kind of a fusion band. There's a lot of African rhythms. Two of the guys are from Ghana and one from Nigeria. And then the other members are from Trinidad, and the Caribbean stuff. So, but if you look on the left-hand side, this is a attack by a jaguar that was done in 1910. It's one of the last, by the way, it's one of the last paintings by Rousseau, is this one. You can see a human being is being attacked by a jaguar in the imagery. But this kind of style of artwork is called primitivism. And James, you asked about the controversy stuff, with nudity and stuff in here, and this is the one that got in a lot of trouble. It seems totally benign by today's standards, but this one, caused some problems when it came out in 82. The band is Bow Wow Wow, and it's a takeoff, it's a pastiche of Edward Manet's Luncheon on the Grass. It came out in the middle of the 19th century. It depicts the photographer here that did the artwork is Egan. And when we said before that that photography was kind of put in the background, it doesn't mean it was diminished or disappeared. Or there's no, still there's some photography used. And this album cover represents kind of a problem with the public. This is the nude woman in the album cover, The Last of the Mohegans, is the 15-year-old band member, lead singer of the group, Bow Wow Wow. And the mother was really ticked off about this whole thing. And she got Scotland Yard involved in all this, and charges of child exploitation, sexual exploitation what's going on. But the album cover was still used. They didn't care. They just did it anyways. It was released in the United States as Last of the Mohegans, and it was released in the UK under a different title. But it's what was it? Sea Jungle, I think was the title of it. Same imagery. Nothing really happened to it. Surrealism is all over the place in a lot of the artwork. Salvador Dali on the left-hand side, Geopolitica's Child Watching the Birth of a New Nation. 1943 was put on a James Gang 1975 album, Newborn. And I gotta tell you this. This is really, really rare. This is something a lot of people don't know about. Salvador Dali actually did an album cover, and he did this for Jackie Gleason, of all people. But Jackie Gleason and Salvador Dali were good friends, and Jackie Gleason had asked Salvador Dali to do an album cover for her. This is in 1955. So yes, it's outside of the realm of the Golden Age, but I had to bring this in because of its just historical significance. And the painting is called Lonesome Echo. And he did it. You can see Dali's signature on the cover. He did this for Jackie Gleason. And on the back of this album, there's a picture of Gleason and Salvador Dali shaking hands. And Salvador Dali explains what the painting's all about. It's interesting. It's a rare album.
Totally ahead of their time.
Oh, God. This is this album, by the way, by Jackie Gleason, of all people. He's a band leader as well as a comedian. But I think it was on the top of the charts for a long time.
That's amazing.
There's a lot of artwork by Rene Magritte that shows up on album covers and on book covers and all sorts of stuff. Everybody was Rene Magritte crazy at this time. But this album, The Memories of a Saint, the left-hand side was shown on Gladys Knight and the Pips' Visions album, 1983. Beckola, which we showed you previously, by Jeff Beck. La Chambre d'écoute, The Listening Chamber. The C album, which we mentioned earlier also, by the Young Rascals. The Grand Famille, the Grand Family, the Big Family. All Magritte stuff showing up in album covers. And you know, Edward Hopper, I'll show you some American artists. Edward Hopper, Open All Night, by the Nighthawks, contains one of Hopper's great paintings. Winslow Homer, guess what? On album cover, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. You know, it's a 1865 painting. John Curry, The Tragic Prelude. This is an artwork that was actually a mural that's done on the state capitol building in Topeka, Kansas. And the band Kansas wanted to use it on their album cover, 1974 album cover. So there it is. Listen, this is the tip of the iceberg as far as art history is concerned. When you guys get a chance to see the exhibit, there's going to be a lot of about 40 images that have album covers that take up the whole wall of art history. But I always mention this as, you know, perhaps an unintended consequence of the Golden Age was that album art introduced artistic developments and styles to a young audience who probably had no previous exposure to or interest in art history. I think that's true also. I use artwork on album covers a lot of times, again, as a hook to get kids interested in art history. It got me interested in it.
Oh, I totally agree with you on this. And here's where my curiosity is, and my question to you would be is, how aware were the youth of the references that they were seeing on these pieces? Were they seeing them? Were they making those? Like, to me, I would think that they had no idea in many cases that they were seeing these pieces and they were actually a Magritte or a Hopper or anyone else, right? And that it was later on that they made that discovery, possibly. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's where I'm interested in. Like, I have a feeling they had no idea at the moment what was going on.
Had no idea. And even in the 1980s and 90s and 2000, when I'm showing my students images and doing art history stuff, they had not a clue. So, for a young person like myself during the 60s and 70s, I just started getting into this artwork and I started researching it. It stimulated my curiosity of art history. And it came to be, I used it as part of my career. It's kind of interesting. I'm sure it happened to many other people. But, whether they knew it was a Magritte or a Salvador Dali, they just thought it was cool. They didn't probably know who did it.
Well, and hopefully open their eyes to appreciate art in a new way and start maybe exploring it. So,
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. But anyways, I just wanted to share some of these slides. This is, as I said earlier, the tip of the iceberg. A lot of world cultural themes, a lot of art history themes. The exhibit that's coming up at Mott Community College in the gallery, September 7th to September 21st. It's going to have a lot of artwork in there. And there'll be 100 album covers in that exhibit. And a lot of it will be stuff that we saw today. So thank you very much for letting me do this. This is really a great time.
oh, well, Doug, thank you for being a part of this talk and being here with us today. I know you're in Arizona, so there's
Yeah.
a little bit of a time change, but this has been absolutely enlightening. I am so excited to kick off our 21-22 exhibition season with your album cover art and being able to see that. So it's been long overdue. We were sad we couldn't do it this year, but we're glad to have you talking with us today. And I'm so excited to have this exhibition and be able to open our gallery again next year. So this has been absolutely wonderful. I do have one quick question for you.
Yeah.
And if you want, you can quit sharing your screen if you want to.
Okay, will do.
But I'm curious, you showed us that, we started off with a heavy influence of photography pre 1967, right?
Yeah.
And then you went back to after 1983, you showed us that Madonna album and Prince, where we're seeing artwork become heavy again. What do you think was that? What do you think, like, it was like this blip? Like, right, we were doing this and now
Yeah.
suddenly we're doing it again, which we see often in art, right? We see this back and forth. But why do you think that was? Do you think? I mean, I'm wondering, was it the introduction to computers to artwork, and that created new opportunities for generating images, or what do you think?
Listen, this is it's hard to talk about these things without talking about what's going on in the larger culture. Listen, 1982, 1983 is when MTV started coming into the picture. CDs started replacing album covers, all that stuff. I think I blame MTV for a lot of this stuff because all of a sudden in the 1980s it becomes me. It's about the person. It's about me and my image and projecting my image to the outside world to sell records. I mean, every one of those album covers that I showed with Madonna and Prince, it says, it just screams out, "Look at me." That's what those album covers do. It's all about me. It's a me generation. 1970s, not so much, but the 80s with disco music and stuff, late 80s, 70s coming in. People dancing by themselves, and I mean, it's just I think it's a cultural thing. Cultural
Well,
shift.
even with the introduction of MTV, do you think it was because now more artists were competing against each other for dominancy in the industry, so that there was a lot of trying to get themselves established and recognized and competing against all these others now that they have a TV venue that is dedicated to music?
Yeah, absolutely. It became a whole new art form. The video became a whole new art form for presenting somebody's music. But listen, during the golden age, music and artwork went together hand in hand. They were just, it's like taking a pill, and it's more than just it's like it increased the efficacy of both the music and the artwork. So the artwork enhanced the music enhanced the artwork, or kind of interpret the artwork. It's just a different cultural shift that we saw happening in the 1980s, I think, with the music industry. I think MTV is to blame for that. I hold them responsible.
We'll let you, you know, where are they now? So, well,
Would
this
you,
has been absolutely enlightening. So I cannot thank you enough for being here with us again, Doug. And and are you doing another talk with us? Aren't you in the fall? Is that correct?
I hope so. Just let me know.
Excellent. Well, we can discuss the MTV movement more then and how it has ruined everything. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And I want to send a special thank you out to Brian Williams from our Educational Media Services for making the live stream possible and running so well. And an extremely special thank you to Brian Liljeblad, who has served as our gallery coordinator for longer than I have been at this college and who is retiring at the end of this next week. So we want to thank you, Brian, for everything you have done to make our gallery run so smoothly, to help support our mission to our students. So thank you. Thank you for that. And we wish you the best as you move on to retirement and enjoying the rest of these years outside of Mott. Doug, thank you. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you again in September. So thank you all and goodbye.